Chapter 5. Wildboy looked up through a veil of wet and tangled hair. The face of a girl glared down at him, as pale as the moon except for strawberry freckles that dotted her cheeks. Her long hair was the colour of rust, and her dress was covered in red and gold sequins that shimmered in the moonlight. Wildboy scrabbled back between the vans, his heart pounding. This was Clarissa Everett, a teenage acrobat from the circus. He'd been enemies with her since the day he joined the fair. That day, more than ever, he had needed to show people that, although he might be small, he'd fight anyone who laid a finger on him. Clarissa had been the first to try, and he'd smashed one of her teeth with a stick. None of the other fairground children had picked on him since. Clarissa stood over him, fists bunched and freckles flared. "This end of the path is circus territory," she said. "Freaks don't belong here, nor rats neither, and you're both." Gripping the caravan wheel, Wildboy pulled himself up. He guessed that Clarissa was only a year older than him and almost as slim, but she was tough too. An acrobat by day and a fairground thief by night, he had to show her he was tougher. He brushed long hair from his eyes, hocked up a ball of spit and fired it to the ground between them. "Fight then," he said. Clarissa did the same, her spit landing inches from his bare feet. "Fight," she agreed. "To the death," Wildboy added, holding her glare. Clarissa hesitated. "What?" "If we fight, it's to the death. Them's the rules." "I ain't fighting to the death. I'm just going to get your teeth out. I followed that family all the way from the gates until you scared them off. They were rich toffs." "All you'd have got was an empty pocketbook. They weren't toffs, at least not no more." "And how could you know that?" "I saw." "Saw?" Wildboy cursed. Other than Sir Oswald, he didn't tell anyone about the way he saw things, and especially not Clarissa. But he sensed an opportunity to make some money, so he wouldn't have to go back to Finch. "How about this?" he said. "I'll find you another toff, a real one this time, for half of what you steal." "I don't need help from a freak." "Then we gotta fight," Wildboy said. "I don't need to fight you neither. I already won." She flicked back her hair and turned to look past the banner. "Go back to your monster museum," she said. Wildboy considered giving her a kick in the back, but he knew this wasn't over yet. He needed Clarissa's help, but she needed him too. "Fair enough," he said, as coolly as he could. "Find a toff yourself, then." He turned to walk away. "Wait," Clarissa said. "How can you find one?" Got her, Wildboy thought, but he tried not to smile. "Always a couple of rich types about," he said. "They come in disguise so they won't get robbed." "Nonsense. Who?" 50-50, even split." He spat on his palm to shake on the deal. "I'm not touching your spit. If you do find a toff, I might give you some of the takings." There was no use arguing. Better to see what she stole, Wildboy thought, and then decide if it was worth fighting for. He moved closer. "Don't you dare touch me," Clarissa warned. "I don't want to catch nothing." But Wildboy barely heard. Already his eyes were searching the crowd, honing in on tiny, telling tales that flashed past the banner. Only after a minute or so did he notice that Clarissa was staring at the hair on his face. He turned, and she looked back to the path. "So," she said, "where's this toff, then?" "There, that man in the cloak." Clarissa gave a decisive snort. The man Wildboy had selected was young and handsome, with bushy black whiskers covering his cheeks. "Nonsense," she said. "His cloak's all shabby." "But look at his shoes, almost clean." "So?" "So the road to the fair's muddy, means he was dropped off by a carriage close by. Ain't too likely for a bloke in a shabby cloak, is it?" Clarissa considered the man curiously. "Maybe he lives close by." "Nah, top of his hat is wet, see? It was still raining wherever he got into his carriage." Wildboy looked up at the clouds scudding past the moon and made a quick calculation. "Lives around London Bridge, I'd say. Lots of toffs there." Clarissa stared at the man, then at Wildboy. "How did you—" "I seen him before," Wildboy said quickly. "Oh, well, then you cheated. Look, he's coming this way." They watched the man approach. With one hand, he pushed an old lady aside in his rush to get through the crowd. His other arm was stuffed inside his cloak, as if he was clutching something to his chest. "Wonder what he's got under there," Wildboy said. "Nice fat pocketbook, that's what," replied Clarissa. They grinned at each other and then scowled, remembering they were enemies. "He's getting closer," Clarissa said. The man looked like he was in a rush. Sweat dripped from beneath the brim of his top hat, and he was muttering under his breath. He stopped and looked over his shoulder, and his arm tightened around whatever he was protecting under his cloak. "See that?" whispered Clarissa. "Definitely something under there." She was trying to look calm, but Wildboy could tell by the way her tongue dashed anxiously over her broken front tooth that she was nervous, just as nervous as he was. Something about the man didn't seem right, although he couldn't work out what. He wanted to warn Clarissa, to tell her they should find someone else, but he reminded himself how badly he needed the money. "Here he comes," Clarissa said. The man came closer. "Now," Wildboy whispered. Clarissa's hands shot under the man's cloak, delving for a pocketbook. He was just inches away on the other side of the banner, so close that Wildboy could see the sweat glisten on his bushy whiskers. For a thrilling second he thought Clarissa was going to pull this off. Then the man stepped back and screamed. One hand seized Clarissa's wrist, while the other lashed out, wielding a clasp knife. Unable to see his attacker, he slashed wildly at the banner. Veins bulged in his forehead as he yelled a strange warning. "You'll never get the machine! You can kill me, but you'll never get the machine!" "Get off me!" Clarissa cried. "Get him off me!" Wildboy struggled to pull her from the man's grip. The knife slashed his coat sleeve, but he held on and pulled harder. Finally, he tore Clarissa free, and they tumbled back between the caravans. When they looked up again, the man had turned and fled for the park gates. All around the path, curious heads turned. Without a word, Wildboy and Clarissa sprang up and pelted away into the backstage area of the circus. They hid behind the stable hut, breathing hard. Clarissa slammed a hand against the stable wall. "Why didn't you tell me he had a knife? He was crazy, a lunatic. And what was he saying?" "Something about a machine," Wildboy wheezed. "What did he have under his cloak?" "Nothing, just this." She thrust a scrap of paper at his face. It looked like a letter. Wildboy reached out to take it, but she snatched it back. "It's your fault," she said. "I ain't got nothing now." She glanced towards the circus tent, and Wildboy saw a fear in her eyes that he recognised. Clarissa, too, was scared to go back. "Well," he said, "maybe we can find another—" "Shut up, freak! I should never have listened to you." She shoved him in the chest and ran off towards the circus. "You owe me double now." Wildboy didn't bother yelling a reply. He had bigger problems than Clarissa Everett. Like her, he'd got nothing, and so he had to return to Finch. By now, the showman would have passed out from drinking, but come the morning— "I ain't scared of him," he muttered unconvincingly. "I'll punch out his teeth. Give him another scar on that ugly—" He turned. Someone was watching him. A dark figure stood in the shadows at the end of the stable, hidden by a sagging black hood and a leather cloak that draped to the ground. Wildboy couldn't see anything under the cloak. No hands, no face, not even any boots through the holes in its tattered, muddy trail. But he was certain the figure was staring at him. He knew that drunks often sneaked behind the caravans for free looks at the freaks, but this person didn't seem like he'd been boozing. The figure stood perfectly silent and perfectly still, except where his leather shroud rustled and creaked in the wind. Gathering his nerve, Wildboy edged closer. "Hey," he said. "Hey, you! Get a good look, did you?" Still the figure didn't move. Then, from under the hood came a voice that caused Wildboy to step back in fright. It was deep and menacing, but also strangely distant, like a growl of an animal far away. "Where is it?" the voice said. "Eh? Where is the machine?" "Machine?" Wildboy replied. Wasn't that what the man he and Clarissa just robbed had yelled? "You'll never get the machine." A cry rang out behind him. He whirled round, but it was just someone at the fair. Quickly he turned back. The hooded man had vanished. "Oh, idiot," Wildboy yelled. He tried to sound tough, but something about that figure had sent a chill through every hair on his body, and even deeper fear than anything he'd experienced that night. Whoever it had been, he was glad the person was gone. He pulled his long coat tighter around him and trudged back towards the freak shows. He looked forward to the fair moving on and getting out of this wretched place. So far, Greenwich wasn't going well at all. See you tomorrow for Chapter 6. Bye.